Well, the purpose of this presentation, this is just for editing purposes, is why do we need to maintain standards in journalism? Journalists are the eyes and the ears of the people. They are the providers of information. And information, as we all know it, is power. It has the power to shape the foundations of established beliefs. It can bring governments down. It can sometimes challenge our own assumptions about things. It is not surprising then that journalists are the only professional group, except the military and the police, which experience the highest number of murders in the world. In the last 20 years, about 1,000 journalists have been killed, documented as murdered because of their professional activity. In the last few years, this rate has accelerated. In 2011, last year, and the first 3 months of this year, 2012, more than 100 journalists around the world have been killed. And these murders do not occur only in war zones, civil conflicts or uprisings. There are more journalists killed outside the war zone because they have or were about to expose corruption of governments, the rich and the powerful, or their misdeeds. But first, why am I qualified to talk about journalistic ethics and international standards in journalism? I spent the last 25 years working as a journalist and a TV producer in the main war zones and civil conflicts around the world. I was privileged to have been able to work for one of the major broadcasters with long tradition of journalistic excellence, the BBC. And I know from first-hand experience how difficult it is to remain objective and impartial when faced with suffering and human injustice about which you are reporting. What you feel in your heart is one thing, and what you put in your reports should be completely separated. And I'll tell you why. There are some very practical reasons why your reporting should be objective, accurate, and impartial. It's all about trust. As a citizen journalist in Syria now, or as a professional journalist in a democratic, pluralist Syria of the future, you want to be trusted. You want the world to believe everything you say. Otherwise, what's the point of being a journalist if people don't read, listen, or watch your reports? And the only way to achieve that is through adherence to the principles of good practice. In other words, the principles of journalistic ethics. In the Western democracies, these principles have evolved over the last 200 years, sometimes painfully, as for example we are now experiencing in Britain the aftermath of the phone hacking scandal. This is when journalists illegally tapped into the voicemails and the voice boxes of famous people and celebrities, sometimes with the collusion of the police, it's alleged. But successive governments of different persuasions have realized that free, independent media underpins the values of our democratic way of life. Number one, be objective. What does that mean in practice? Journalists are human beings, they're not robots. They have opinions, they have moral values, they inevitably sympathize with one political party or another. There is nothing wrong with that. No one is asking of you to erase from your minds all the moral and social values that you have inherited from your family, or adopted at school or university, or from your friends. What objective reporting means is that you leave that out of your work. You can't be seen as speaking on behalf of one political party, religion, or ethnic group. To be objective means to be neutral, impartial. In other words, do not take sides. To be objective means that you don't seek to influence people towards a particular political position. Seeking to influence public opinion is called propaganda. Propaganda also involves something called lying by omission. If you deliberately neglect to mention a fact which is known to you, but you choose to leave it out of your report to support a particular political viewpoint, you are guilty of lying by omission. As I said before, I know how difficult it is to retain neutrality if your family and friends are being killed or tortured, but believe me, the best propaganda you can do is to be an objective, neutral reporter. This applies to the language you use. Avoid emotionally charged words. If you are a broadcaster, your tone of voice should be calm and dispassionate. Remember, the facts speak louder than anything. This is where we come to the next principle. Be accurate. In other words, do not lie. Stick to the facts. Do not invent, embellish or fabricate. I was told this story at one of the first journalist training courses at the BBC some time ago. Here it goes. During the first years of the Second World War, the BBC World Service, which transmitted radio reports to occupied Europe, came under pressure from the government to exaggerate the successes of the Allies against Nazi Germany. The BBC refused by saying that people on the ground to whom you broadcast would know immediately that the reports were false and that would destroy the BBC's credibility. And no one would believe us, the BBC said, when we report our real victories. On a more practical level, there are two situations that you have already found yourself as a citizen journalist, or you will find yourself in the future. Number one, first-hand reporting. You are the eyewitness of an event. It may seem easy at first glance. You are there, you see what's going on with your own eyes. But believe me, it's not. It's actually more difficult than the second-hand reporting. Do not rely on your memory. Take notes. Locations, times, how many explosions, how many bodies, how many tanks, etc. There is always a difficulty with the number of deaths. If you're not sure, use phrases like, I counted 5 bodies on the ground instead of 5 people were killed. Number 2, second-hand reporting. You are relaying what other people have said to you. Is the information from a trusted source? Even if it is, identify the source as much as you can. A local resident, an eyewitness, a rebel commander, a government source, etc. In an ideal world, you should double-check the information through a second source. But that's not always practical. There are situations when a single source is sufficient. For example, if the source is so overwhelmingly reliable, or you are relaying a direct quote from an official source. For example, if the Russian official news agency says that President Putin has gone to Siberia, you don't need to double-check it with a second source. There are other situations when the two-source principle becomes meaningless. For example, if a report is written by one person for 2 news agencies. This is often taken by newsrooms around the world as a corroborated two-source story, but it's not. You need to be able to check whether the source is overwhelmingly reliable. Number 3, doing interviews. Do not take clips from an interview and broadcast them out of context. This is the main cause for bitter arguments between interviewees and broadcasters. It will damage your reputation and you will find it difficult to get people to speak to you. For example, if somebody says to you, I support the government, but I do not agree with what they're doing in Homs, it is appalling. If you just take the second half of this sentence and say, I do not agree with the government because of what they're doing in Homs, without the first part of the sentence, you will be misrepresenting what this person says. Number 4, secret filming. As a citizen journalist in Syria at the moment, you will be involved inevitably in secret filming. This is a difficult area of journalistic ethics because it involves deception. However, the principle of overwhelming public interest overrides the deception argument. In normal peacetime situations, secret filming is normally authorized by the highest levels of your broadcasting organization, and it is done on the basis that there is no other way of getting the story, and the story is in the public interest. Lastly, be unbiased, be fair. This is one of the most difficult principles to adhere to, especially in a single story. What does that mean? Well, if you get 3 people, even on the same side of the political argument, you are likely to get 3 different opinions. If you are an ethical journalist, you should attempt to reflect the multitude of opinions that exist on a particular event or story. This is often confused with objectivity, but it's different. Objectivity deals with the facts, fairness deals with the reflection of different opinion. In a pluralistic democracy, which means that different political parties exist side by side and compete for the votes of the population, journalists should attempt to reflect all these views. This is not always practical, especially in a civil war situation when you're physically on one side of the barricade. However, ethical journalists should attempt to achieve that over a period of time, for example over the course of a year or over sometimes the course of the lifetime of a story. If you do that, you will stand out from the rest of the journalists. And 2 last things. Do not take other people's stories as your own. Outside the war zone, it is a criminal offence. In a conflict situation, it's simply not fair. Number 2, your safety and the safety of your colleagues is paramount. In our business, we have a saying, don't become the story. That means that other journalists will then be reporting on your death or injury. There is absolutely no point in getting killed in pursuit of a story. Not least because you won't be able to show the story to the world. And lastly, it's not ethical to jeopardize the lives of your colleagues and the people around you in order to get the story.